What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my 5th attempt at trying to film this review because for some reason my mouth and my brain don't want to work together. Today we're going to be talking about a new film that just dropped on Shudder. I could have dropped my review a little bit sooner, but I'm a little bit behind on my release cycle for films. But today, on September 22nd of 2022, a brand new horror film just hit the horror streaming service Shudder, and that film is called Raven's Hollow. Written and directed by Christopher Hatton, who wrote this film alongside Chuck Reeves, this film stars people like Moseley, Melanie, Zanetti, David Heyman, Dickie, and many others, and is a horror adaptation of the supposed true-life event that inspired Edgar Allan Poe to write his famous short story, The Raven. Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you for clicking on this video and stopping by to hear what I have to say about this new horror film on Shudder. A big thanks to Shudder for sending me an early screener for this film. I could have dropped a review a lot sooner, as I mentioned in the intro, but I'm a little behind on my release cycle. So moving forward with other films that I will be sent a little bit early, I'll do my best to get those reviews out before the day of release. But I definitely still wanted to drop this here today and definitely wanted to talk about this film. Raven's Hollow, like I mentioned in the intro, is a horror adaptation of the supposed real-life event that Edgar Allan Poe went through, a supernatural event that inspired him to write his famous short story known as The Raven. I think even if you don't really know much about the person Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven at least is going to probably seem familiar to most people. So yeah, I was definitely interested in this movie as it started to progress, because going into it and clicking play, I hadn't read a synopsis, I had not watched the trailer, I hadn't even looked at the poster, I knew nothing about it other than the fact that I had a screener for a movie called Raven's Hollow. And yeah, I'm happy to say that for the most part, I enjoyed myself. I can't say this is a movie that I'm running to rewatch or a movie that I'm running to, tell people about and refer to people. I'll probably just say that it was overall an entertaining watch. In some ways, it felt really cinematic and modern, and in some ways, it kind of reminded me of a TV movie of the mid-2000s, and not necessarily in a bad way, not like an early 2000s sci-fi original movie, but something that's just entertaining to watch, something that was on, that was interesting enough to watch through from beginning to end, but isn't something that you're necessarily clamoring to revisit. I will say overall, though, my biggest praises of this film, without a doubt, have to be the visual element of this film and the amount of attention to detail that went to the overall aesthetics and period piece element of this film. This is obviously a period piece taking us back in the day, and I really thought that the costume design, the set design, the locations used, and the overall setting of the film really took you back to that time. It's always a shame when you watch a period piece that you feel doesn't truly transport you to a different time, and thankfully in the case of Raven's Hollow, I think that there was enough attention to detail in terms of its visuals, locations, sets, costume design, and all that really did take you back to that time. I think without a doubt my favorite performance in this film comes from Moseley, our lead actor who plays Edgar Allan Poe, and I think he gives a really compelling performance over the course of the film, and for the most part I would say that the entire cast gives a good performance. There are a couple of moments of performance from certain people, smaller roles that weren't necessarily the greatest, but it's super minor, and for the most part when it comes to the overall talent on screen and the amount of work that came from the talent off screen, you can definitely tell there was a lot of attention into detail that went into making this film look good and be performed well. Beyond that, ultimately, my biggest issue with this film was that it was just okay. I wasn't crazy about it. I found it to be very predictable. I saw where a lot of it was going, and after a while, this film kind of becomes a bit of a supernatural slasher in a way. The base premise of this film is that you have Edgar Allan Poe and a group of other cadets strolling across some sort of weird setup that looks like a scarecrow, and when they pull up to it, they end up finding that there's a man that's been gutted that's tied up to this thing. Not too long into it, though, they end up finding out about this legend called the Raven, some sort of supernatural being that's not a bird, but doesn't really take to guest visitors or new people in this area in any way, shape, or form. So anybody who comes into this town that's new and that this creature is not familiar with, it wants to kill them. And so you do see the creature later on. It's very supernatural. There's kind of a Raven element to it, but a lot of it's definitely like ghost movie kind of stuff. So in terms of the accuracy of what Edgar Allan Poe actually went through that actually inspired his story, The Raven, and what this movie is, of course, I'm assuming that majority of this is just BS. But yeah, overall, it is a ghost movie, and the ghost starts to kill people off over the course of the film as Edgar Allan Poe starts to try to uncover things and tries to figure out who this person is or who this creature is is, and what role it plays in this town and how to stop it and all those things. And in a lot of ways, in terms of its base premise, we've seen that movie before in a lot of other movies, franchises, whatever the case may be. What makes this iteration interesting is the period piece fact of it, and the fact that you have Edgar Allan Poe as our main character, because this is supposed to have inspired him to write The Raven. So yeah, I think if you go into this, you might think, oh, is it going to be kind of a different telling of The Raven? And in some ways, you can see the similarities in the story between this and, his actual short story, The Raven. But in a lot of ways, it's very different as well. So they went with an approach of making this movie more about a bunch of different things that inspired him to create a story with those different pieces, rather than it being him writing a story based on the exact events he went on. So going into this, you shouldn't expect to see The Raven redone in this movie. In a way, it's its own story, it's its own movie that includes those various pieces that formed to make The Raven later on. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, overall, this wasn't a movie I'm clamoring to revisit, but I did enjoy a lot about the visuals and how the film was made. I can see a lot of people watching this on Shudder, and some people enjoying it more than me, and some people being a little bit more bored by it, because ultimately I would be lying if I said that I was completely entertained from beginning to end. There was a predictability element to this movie, and over the course of the film, I found myself slowly kind of just losing interest a little bit as I kind of saw where it was going, and it overall became super predictable. Outside of Edgar Allan Poe, played by William Moseley, I never truly found myself super ingrained in the characters, who they are, and what's going on. So for me, it felt like just a bunch of characters that were fodder for this creature to kill over the course of the film. Again, I will say that I enjoyed the overall look of the film, so when people are killed, I thought that the practical effects used were pretty solid, but I will say what holds this film back is the CGI, because when we do see this creature, the Raven, in the film, yeah, the CG around the character is a little bit dated by today's standards. But yeah, overall, this is a movie that I'm definitely curious to hear what people have to say about it. This is a movie I can recognize as not a definitive good or bad movie, in my opinion. I think this is a movie that is going to depend on who you are, and you might skew one way or the other. I'd say this is a middle-of-the-road movie for me overall. I feel like I've seen this movie a million times, minus the Edgar Allan Poe elements of it. I feel like there's a lot about this film that's just super predictable, and again, I've seen it before. It feels familiar. It was entertaining enough, though. I did watch from beginning to end, and though I was bored at times, I was still engaged enough to sit here and talk about the movie. But I could definitely see some other people who are big fans of Edgar Allan Poe maybe enjoying this film a little bit more, maybe people who are bigger fans of period pieces, and I can see some people being a little bit more bored by it. So I think it's really going to depend on who you are. And if you're watching this because Shudder brought you here, you watched the movie and then you tried to look for somebody to talk about it, please leave a comment down below and let me know what your experience was with the film. Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? And if you're more familiar with Edgar Allan Poe's story and maybe what he truly went through, I would love to have somebody give me some insight down below on the true inspirations of The Raven and how much BS this movie is. A big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.